Welcome to IndiTalk. This is a show in which we ruminate together on controversial issues of national importance. And today's subject is going to be the demolition of statues, which is known also as Iconoclasm, a word derived from Latin, which means the destruction of icons, whether they be statues or religious texts or paintings or any kind of a depiction that is symbolic of either religious or political power. The most recent manifestation of this was in Tripura, where the BJP came to power, and in an act of what is known as triumphalism, which means that we are triumphant and therefore we shall make our triumph evident to the whole world, they broke down a statue of Lenin. Now, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin was basically a Russian revolutionary who in 1917, captured power in what is known as the October Revolution in Russia, which promised to free the Russian labor, Russian peasants from the oppression of the Tsarist regime and give them bread, butter, and equality. It was hailed all over the world as one of the greatest triumphs of human liberty after the French Revolution. Now, what this revolution did for Tripura, frankly, I don't know. And I don't even know whether half the people in Tripura have even heard of Lenin, whose statue had been erected by the Marxist government that ruled Tripura for nearly over 2 decades. But the symbolic downfall of Lenin seems to be a pattern in which political polarization seems to take an edge over the resolution of differences either in politics through the ballot or through sitting down and talking at a table and coming to a mutual understanding within a democracy. Now, I am no fan of Lenin's, and nor do I know what he claims to have achieved for the Russian people, that he did really achieve, or whether he carved out a state which was run by the Cheka, which was a very nasty and brutal secret police which butchered people in their hundreds of thousands that were opposed to Lenin's regime, created the Bolshevik single-party state, and paved the way for the advent of Stalin. Now, whether he should be celebrated in India or not is not really the question here. The question is, what is the symbolism of statues and demolishing statues? See, I for one am no fan of really building statues to please people's egos, and nor am I one for demolishing them once they are built, because all statues, as we know, ultimately have feet of clay, no matter what the living inspiration of the person it was supposed to represent has really been. We don't know whether that statue is really the truth or whether that statue is really some kind of a making up of history. I love statues. I'd like them to adorn, say, a particularly drab part of my study, which may look a little ugly and beautified. But apart from that, as personally, they have no value to me at all. But nonetheless, let's see that is India the only place in which this kind of iconoclasm, the breaking down of statues, which was almost a demolition derby that followed, because Periyar, the great Dravidian leader, his statue was demolished in the south, and then followed by Ambedkar, the father of our constitution, the great leader of the Dalits, followed by Shama Prasad Mukherjee, who was the founder of the Jansan in Kolkata. What good does this do anybody except to escalate a war into heightened frenzies of political polarization? But it seems none of us is free of it. Now, Lenin did not come down just in Tripura. He also came down thousands of his statues in the Ukraine. In 2015, for example, Ukraine passed a law in which all symbols of the communist regime were to be brought down, including thousands of statues of Lenin. The most famous statue that came down in recent years, in 2003, was that of Saddam Hussein in Iraq after the American invasion. And do you think China, do you think Mao, the great liberator of China, the great helmsman, was he also completely sacrosanct? No. In a place called Henan, recently, Mega Mao was brought down. It was a golden statue of this great leader of the Chinese Revolution, Mao Zedong, the creator of China. And there was a huge statue being erected of him, and people objected to it. The Chinese people objected to it over the internet, saying that too much money is being spent on it and we should bring it. And the statue of a great man like Mao Zedong was also brought down. Gandhi was not free of this either. Just recently, there were professors and intellectuals in Ghana, in Accra, who wrote a letter saying that Gandhi, now whether they were accurate or not is another matter, but they said he represented racism, that he represented Indian casteism, and therefore his statue should not be placed in the university at Accra and was removed from there. And remember, Gandhi was one of the great spiritual leaders who actually helped inspire the African national movement against white racism and white rule. Would Ambedkar have agreed? Well, let me tell you, Ambedkar himself was to a certain extent an iconoclast. How many people remember that in 1927, on Christmas Day in Mahad, in the south of Bombay, Ambedkar had a huge gathering, a huge following, in which he actually burnt one of the most important part of what the Hindus consider to be their Dharma Shastra, which is the Manusmriti. They took a mass pledge for equality, for the abolition of the caste system, for the equality of women. They made a bonfire in front of the speaker's platform and they consigned the Manusmriti to the flames. Now, that was Ambedkar. I'll give you a more recent example, and this one fresh from America. I was there last year when actually rioting, violence, and even death occurred as a result of riots that took place in Charlottesville, Virginia. Why? Because the local government of Charlottesville wanted to remove the statue of Robert E. Lee and some of the Confederate generals from public places in Charlottesville. Who was Robert E. Lee? Robert E. Lee was the chief general of the Confederacy, which was a confederate of southern states which tried to break away from the main United States in support of the continuation of the barbaric practice of slavery. And this war of succession, or the Civil War, resulted in the loss of innumerable hundreds of thousands of lives, and it was felt that these Confederate generals, the people who stood up for slavery and were defeated, and a new America, free of slavery, came into being, was not worthy. No city was worthy of having to celebrate these people as icons. But when their statues were removed, there were enough people who believed that these people had a just cause and were standing up for their cause, and this led to violence. And there is still tension on this issue in America. Even now, in the cities, huge debates rage over this. So it hasn't really, removing those statues really hasn't solved the problem. Now, Stalinist statues, the Stalin who followed Lenin, now they were removed in Budapest, in Hungary, for example, after the Hungarians staged a revolt against Soviet dominance. Of all people, the statue of Christopher Columbus was removed in South American cities. Christopher Columbus. Then Cecil Rhodes in South Africa, in Cape Town. Gaddafi in Tripoli, and Hosni Mubarak in Cairo, and of course our own Babri Masjid, which is another example certainly of iconoclasm, or the breaking down of symbols of either past oppression or something that comes as an eyesore or a blot on the history of what people consider to be their nationalist pride. But does it solve any problems ultimately? I mean, those are the question of to ask. Is Egypt any better off today? Is Iraq any better off today? Is Syria, which also destroyed the statue of Hafiz Assad, is that any better off today? Are we at a closer resolution of the Babri Masjid, Ram Mandir tangle after the destruction of the Babri Masjid? No, because the statue bashing, shows me actually that historical legacies cannot be ended or cannot be made by erecting symbols and statues. And I think the only person who got this absolutely correct in terms of the significant importance of people building huge monuments to themselves was Percy Bysshe Shelley, the great the great English poet. In a small poem he wrote called Ozymandias. And I will read a little bit from that poem in which he says my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair. Now, this depicts a wrecked statue of a king of ancient times, a great, great king of ancient times, lying forgotten in the desert. And a traveler comes upon it. The face of that statue is headless. The trunk is headless. The face has a frown and a sneer, which the sculptor carved on the features, and on its base were these lines. What is the meaning of this? Basically, that this reminds powerful people that their power is only temporary. But the line that I like the most of interpretations that I've read of this great poem is that obscurity is the ultimate destiny of the human race. One day, all our works will lie as dust under a dying sun for some alien traveler to gaze upon and wonder who or what we were. The cosmos itself will whirl and condense, rip apart, and ultimately die too. An interesting philosophical thought there. And that's all for IndiTalk for today. I am Indrajit Badwar. We'll be back again with more burning issues. Catch us.